People here resented the threat to their way of life, which they believed the Confederacy posed, and Sumter confirmed their worst fears.
Why the North went to war is, in my opinion, one of the basic unanswered questions, or that is to say, it has not really been answered completely satisfactorily, despite all the volumes of history written on this subject. It's much easier to understand why the South seceded, that Lincoln's election represented a potential, if not immediate, threat to the institution of slavery. I think to understand the North's reaction, you have to then go back and look at the ideology of the Union, the ideology of democracy, the notion of a future greatness for the American empire, as they called it, the nationalism, and the fear of the country being balkanized into a number of competing smaller nations. There were those, as you know, Horace Greeley and others, who said, erring sisters, go in peace, let them go. There were abolitionists who had urged the breakup of the Union before the war. But I think Lincoln very cleverly maneuvered the South into a situation where it fired the first shot. And this led to a feeling in the North that the South was the aggressor, the South had attacked the Union, and considerations like peaceable secession sort of were swept aside in a wave of patriotism.
Within a day of Sumter's surrender, thousands of Union recruits answered their president's call. States competed to exceed their quotas. Soon, there were more volunteers than there were guns and uniforms to equip them. I have grasped the weapon of death for the purpose of doing my part, wrote Philip Smith of the 8th Missouri Regiment, defending my country from a band of contemptible traitors who would destroy the best and noblest government on earth. Men willingly left their families to join the fight, and they were sorely needed. The Union Army was ill prepared for this war. In 1861, there were only 14,000 Army regulars, and most of them were out west fighting Indians. State militias, widely regarded as social clubs, not fighting units, were the first to be called. Experienced field commanders were also in short supply. 1/3 of the United States Army officers had resigned to fight for the Confederacy. When the war started, there were only 600 men defending the city of Washington, so Lincoln's first order of business was to reinforce the capital as quickly as possible. Trainloads of new recruits headed south. Liquor flowed freely among these war-bound troops who sang songs and yelled greetings to the crowds of well-wishers, until, that is, a regiment of volunteers from Massachusetts arrived in Baltimore, Maryland, a slave state whose loyalty was divided. The soldiers were attacked by pro-Confederate mobs. When the smoke cleared, 4 soldiers and 12 civilians lay dead. Washington's garrison was at first so puny that the White House had to rely for its defense on civilian volunteers, and this at a time when the front line was just a stone's throw away. Confederate Virginia lay just across the Potomac River in full view of the White House windows. Fortunately, the threat of invasion was not real at first, though the measures taken to discourage it were not impressive. But the capital would have to stiffen its defenses. Washington was surrounded. To the south, the rebel states. To the north, Maryland, whose loyalty to the Union was suspect since the Baltimore riots. Lincoln also worried about the other border slave states, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Missouri. Tennessee had already joined the Confederacy, but he was determined to win it back.
No general in modern times had ever conquered a territory as large as the South. The South didn't have to win in order to win. It could lose every battle in most campaigns, and if the North just got tired enough of fighting and quit, the South would win. It wasn't threatening to just do anything to the North. It just said, we want to be left alone. If we punish you enough, you'll leave us alone and we'll go our way.
order to win, it had to defeat the South in battle. And to ensure victory, it had to deprive the rebels of outside help. But the Confederates kept delaying the fight while they sought foreign recognition. They were convinced that if Europe recognized the Confederacy, the North would have to accept their independence. Washington was soon surrounded by tents. Unlike the South, equipment was never to be a problem for the North. It had more resources and easier access to foreign suppliers, which gave it an edge from the start. Life in the camps was ordered by the sounds of the bugle and the drum. The daily routine began with reveille at 5 a.m. It was followed by digging ditches, cutting wood, and policing the company grounds. Food was always in good supply on the northern side, though the diet was tedious. Fatty bacon and tough flour biscuits called hardtack. And few were ready for the monotony of real soldiering. First thing in the morning is drill, wrote one Pennsylvania recruit, and then drill, and then drill again. One of the few new diversions was photography, discovered only 20 years before, and a subject of great fascination.
There was one basic process used worldwide, and that was called the wet plate process. It gets its name because the glass plate negative actually had to be damp in order to be light sensitive. So the photographer had to actually have a darkroom wagon with him on the spot. He had to make the negative, expose it, and develop it all within about 10 minutes before that plate dried. You had two main popular forms that Civil War photographs came in. Probably the most popular of all, and this was for studio portraiture, was the carte de visite. It's a French word. It means visiting card. These became popular in the United States in 1860, and they very quickly attracted a great deal of attention. They were relatively inexpensive. They could be mass-produced. They were very convenient to send through the mails. And in 1861, when the soldiers go off to war, more had their portraits taken as carte de visites than any other form. And the photographs were very, very important to the servicemen and to the families back home. Now, as far as field photography, battlefield photography is concerned, the stereo view was king. These three-dimensional stereo views were produced in large quantities. I would venture to say that of the actual battlefield outdoor series that were recorded, 75% were originally taken with the twin-lens stereo camera.
Three-dimensional stereo photography was to Civil War America what television is for us today. Teams of photographers would follow every battle and bring back the shocking proof of what had happened. Earlier photographs taken for families and friends had told a terrible lie. The gallant young men in heroic poses, uniforms clean and buttons polished, were relics of the past. This ugly truth about modern war was about to be learned at Manassas.
Of the elastic that's on the top, the elastic around the waistline does not bulk you up or does not get in the way of the elastic around the bottom of the top. Widespread